Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank my colleague from Kansas for making such a powerful, persuasive case for human rights and freedom in North Korea and around the world. I'd like to change subjects just slightly for a few minutes and talk about some experiences over the last couple of weeks. Last Wednesday, tens of thousands of Americans celebrated Tax Day by speaking out against the direction of this federal government. I attended 3 Tea Parties in South Carolina, and what struck me the most was how nonpartisan these events were. These were just families, couples with children, not necessarily Republicans or Democrats, but both there. But they didn't care about parties or candidates. They cared about their kids and the debt we're saddling them with almost everything we do here in Washington. They cited with their signs and their voices that every American today has a $35,000 share in our national debt. That's just today, not counting what we've added. And it doesn't count the unfunded cost of Social Security and Medicare that we've borrowed from our future. The way we're spending up here, the per capita debt in our country will soon exceed the per capita income. You know, we're not just bankrupting our country. We're bankrupting generations of Americans not even born yet. This is a moral issue. Every dollar spent represents another freedom seized, another constitutional principle ignored, another opportunity squandered. The American people are tired of politicians, Republican and Democrat, borrowing and spending money on programs we do not need, programs they know will not work. The message of the Tea Parties is clear. Stop growing government and spending all our money, all our kids' money, all our grandkids' money. But will we get the message? We keep hearing that we're in the middle of an economic crisis, but we're really in the middle of a political crisis. We hear a lot about corporate greed, but that pales in comparison to the political greed of elected officials who continue to make promises that we can't pay for and borrowing the money to do it. A poll conducted last week suggests that while a majority of American people have a favorable view of these Tea Parties, only 13% of the political class does. It's the same pattern over and over again on the stimulus, on earmarks, on socialized and rationed health care, on the proposed tax on electricity and energy. Americans disagree with Washington on these socialist experiments, and our leaders act as if it's the American people who are the ones that are out of touch. Indeed, no sooner had the protesters gone home than they learned that their preference for freedom, limited government, local control, marked them as potential terrorist threats, according to a report by the Department of Homeland Security. Americans have been misled and lied to by elected officials who promised the world while stealing our future. And they've had enough. Tea Parties are only the beginning. Americans have come to understand that many of our problems are caused by more government and that they can only be solved by more freedom. Think of the things that are categorized as crises today. A crisis in education, crises in health care, crises in energy, our transportation infrastructure, banking and finance, the auto industry. But who has been running these services for the last several decades? Who's been running our education system? It hasn't been the free market. It hasn't been free people. It's been government, with the price we're paying expanding faster than any other service. We spend more per capita than any other country in the world, yet consistently we lose ground to other industrialized nations. We don't need more federal control. We need more freedom in education, more choices, more competition, more technology, the kinds of things that government and union control cannot provide in our education. It may be a crisis, but it's not one caused by freedom. It's one caused by politicians. And what about health care? We talk about the number of uninsured Americans, but have we really given freedom a chance? The rules and laws we pass up here make it virtually impossible for individuals to own and keep their own insurance policy. There are ways we can solve this problem. There are ways we can get every American insured without spending one additional dime of tax dollars. But instead, the movement here in Washington is towards government health care, socialized medicine, and we've made a down payment in our recent budget in that direction. We have an energy crisis, but who has held back this country from exploring and developing our own energy reserves? It hasn't been the free markets or free people. It's been this government. And under the name of environmental protection, we've actually made the environment worse by blocking nuclear energy, blocking natural gas development, and not moving where other countries have towards cleaner energy sources that were within our reach. What about our transportation infrastructure? Who's been running that? Increasingly, the federal government takes more and more gas tax dollars here, and instead of giving it back to states for their priorities, we earmark it in every different direction. That's political greed. That's not a fault of freedom. What about banking and finance? The government was going to help our financial system, so they made loans. Not to just those that were too big to fail. If you talk to local bankers, the federal government essentially forced these banks to take this money. And now they won't let them give it back. And now they're talking about converting these loans into common stock so the federal government owns our banks. That's not freedom. That's not the America we know. That's nationalization. That's socialization of a country. Freedom hasn't failed in the financial markets. It's been this government, our oversight, and the government intermediaries of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which essentially brokered and packaged all of these so-called toxic assets. Freedom hadn't failed. Has freedom failed in our auto industry? Of course not. The government and the labor unions have been running the American auto companies for years. Management has very little discretion. If you look at other auto companies that are free of government control, free of the barnacles of unionization, you see these companies succeeding in the United States. You can't bail them out with more money. You have to bail them out with freedom. You know, over the work period, I had a chance to visit Europe and the Middle East. I had a chance to welcome the new Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, back to office. It was interesting to hear him talk. He was concerned about the direction of our country moving towards a more socialist direction, while he realized the opportunities in Israel was to move away from socialism to more free markets, more land reform that allowed more property ownership, exactly the opposite of where we see us going. He realized in order to have a prosperous Israel and a strong military and a bright future, he needed to move his country more towards freedom. And I heard the same thing in Brussels from a lot of our European allies, startled at the level of spending and debt that the United States is taking on, concerned that we have the ability to pay it back, concerned that our commitment to military is falling off, concerned that America would not be there as promised as part of a NATO partner sometime in the future. But it was concern about our abandonment of free market principles, free trade, the things that can make the world safe, prosperous, that the United States seem to be pulling back from those principles. You know, I just wanted to share a few thoughts today because as we talk about more government and more spending in almost every area of our lives, and we continue to blame our problems on freedom and capitalism and people who work hard and take personal responsibility, it seems that we have it backwards from what actually made America great and exceptional and unique and prosperous and good. Now, I keep hearing that our economic problems were caused by the free market. But what free market? What have I talked about that's had a chance to work as a free market? If you look at those areas where the government has not yet reached its tentacles in to regulate to the point of paralysis, look at our telecommunication system, which we're talking about in committee of how can we regulate. This incredible explosion of innovation and choice and competition the cell phones, the BlackBerries, the fantastic ways we have to communicate all over the world could have never been created by a government system. It was created by free people and free markets. And that can work in every area as it has before in America. And let's don't blame this financial and housing problem on freedom and free markets. The government itself, through its public-private partnership of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, was the broker of these deals, the middleman of toxic assets. No private company would take the kind of risks that were taken unless they could first get cheap money, which the Federal Reserve provided, and then have a basic government guarantee for these loans that they were making and packaging. The government is in the middle of this crisis. It's political greed. It's not the fault of freedom. But this Congress and this federal government is really at a crossroads, and American people are standing there with these Tea Parties telling us, don't give up on freedom. Government does not work. Socialism does not work. There is no example in history where it has, yet we contemplate every day another step closer to more government control. I'm thankful the American people are standing up. They're alarmed at what we're doing. It has nothing to do with politics, has nothing to do with political party. It has everything to do with what makes this country great and good. And we've abandoned it here in Congress. But this crossroads we stand at is a crossroads between freedom and socialism. And some folks say, well, you shouldn't use that term socialism. But folks, when the government basically controls or owns most aspects of economic production, which is where we're headed today, we are talking about socialism. Socialism that's to the left of where many European countries are. We can stop it, but we have to stop it starting today. And that's why these Tea Parties are so important. And I hope they'll shake a few people up here in both parties. I hope they'll send a message that this government is for the people and of the people and by the people. And if we don't get it right, if we don't listen to them, these people can take it back. And I'm thankful that they're willing to stand up and express their voices. And I'm very sorry that anyone in this administration or this government would categorize them as a threat in any way because they're willing to speak out against what they know is wrong here in Washington. I encourage my colleagues as we think about one spending program after another, one government takeover after another, that we not give up on freedom and that we listen to the American people.